cycling in the city. So as was already mentioned, my name is Neal Scott. I'm the president of Cycle Kingston. I'll tell you a little bit more about Cycle Kingston later on. I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Geography and Planning and an avid cycle commuter. I've been at Queens since about 2005. I live about 7.5 kilometers from campus. I have never had a parking pass since I've been at Queens, and I use the TransPass program in the winter when road conditions are such that I'm not comfortable riding my bike. But otherwise, basically, I ride my bike to campus pretty much every day. And I figure I've saved myself about $20,000 just in parking fees since 2005, but we'll talk about some of those economic benefits later on. So first of all, just before I get started on some of the details, I wanted to just let everybody know, in case you didn't know, that this week is Cycling Week. Cycle Kingston has been involved in coordinating activities for Cycling Week for several years. This year is a little bit different, as was last year, in that we're not able to do in-person events, so we're doing a lot of virtual events, and one of those is a cycling photo contest. So if you have a favorite photograph related to cycling, and you'll see a picture here of one that was submitted as part of last year's competition, feel free to submit those photographs. You can find instructions on how to do that at our website, which is shown here on this particular slide. So enjoy the week, get out, ride your bike. Today is also World Bicycle Day, so another great day to celebrate bicycles and cycling. So the pandemic has created an interesting time in terms of cycling. There's been a huge increase in terms of the number of people using bicycles, both for transportation, but also for recreation. And this first bullet point I show here just shows that this boom that we've had is expected to increase for years to come. And in fact, if you've tried to buy a bicycle or buy any bicycle parts this summer, you may have experienced the fact that it's actually really hard to find things. And most of the bike shops actually don't even have any bikes to sell this summer. So an interesting time. It will be interesting to see in the future going forward whether this continues to grow or if this is just a little blip in time. But even before the pandemic, Kingston was building momentum in terms of trying to promote cycling in the city. And in fact, in 2017, City Council passed an ambitious plan to increase the mode share of active transportation, primarily walking and cycling, to get to a point of about 20% of mode share by 2034, which is an ambitious target. To achieve that target, a couple of things have happened. The Active Transportation Master Plan was developed in June of 2018, and Cycle Kingston played a role in helping to shape some of the goals and priorities of that master plan. That was followed by the Active Transportation Implementation Plan, which was approved in September of 2019. It included the details of what needed to be done and how they would be done and when they would be done to achieve some of the goals set out in the master plan a year before that. And I haven't put in all the details, but just a few key areas that show up in the implementation plan. One is the development of some neighborhood level infrastructure and programming as one of the key focus areas. The other one is the development of a citywide network of paths, both for pedestrians, but also for cyclists, to create an interconnected network that allows people to move around all parts of the city. And the final part of the implementation plan is the development of a range of programs and policies. And I haven't listed them all, but just some of the key ones and ones that are of particular interest to Cycle Kingston: an active routes to school program, an active transportation wayfinding system, promotion and educational programs, bylaw updates, monitoring and evaluation of the various measures that are implemented, improved parking, addressing questions of bicycle theft, etc. So this just gives you an idea of the scope of activities that are part of the implementation plan. Anytime a community wants to increase the mode share of cyclists contributing to commuting, there's kind of several things that need to happen for that to be achieved. And they're often summarized as these 5 E's, if you will. And I've listed them here. The top 2 are underlined: education and encouragement, because those are the ones that really link to the kind of activities that Cycle Kingston is engaged with. There's also an engineering and infrastructure component as well as an enforcement component. And finally, there's an evaluation and planning component. Whenever you put measures in place, it's always good to evaluate them and see what's successful and what's not successful. And as you saw in the implementation plan, evaluation is part of that program as well. So again, these top 2, education and encouragement, are really the parts that Cycle Kingston addresses. So just to say briefly about who is Cycle Kingston. So we're a local organization, nonprofit, charitable. It was started in around 2004 as part of the climate change action plan that was implemented here in Kingston. It became a charitable organization in 2007. It's run by a volunteer board of directors. If you're interested in some of the programs that I talk about today, or any of the concepts and ideas that I talk about, we're always looking for new board members who might like to get involved. So feel free to reach out to us if that's of interest to you. We have memberships, and members will volunteer at various events. For example, every year we do a Light My Ride campaign where we hand out lights to cyclists who are riding at night without proper illumination. Again, it's kind of an educational program to highlight the importance of using lights to promote cycling safety. Our office is in the Memorial Center, which is provided to us through the city of Kingston. We also have 2 social enterprises. One of them is called Gear Up Recycled Bikes. This is a youth employment program designed to provide paid summer jobs to young people. Right now we have actually 4 students working for us, basically fixing up donated bicycles, and then we sell them, which also serves as a bit of a fundraiser for Cycle Kingston. Our other social enterprise is Bicycle Valet Kingston. This was started up just before the pandemic, and so it only really had about a year to get established before the pandemic started. The goal is to be able to provide secure valet parking for events throughout Kingston. So we're hoping that once things come back to some semblance of normal and we have activities again, that this social enterprise will be able to take off and flourish the way that Gear Up Recycled Bikes has. Kind of an overall goal or a mission for Cycle Kingston is to promote and encourage safe cycling in Kingston through a range of educational and public outreach activities. So what I want to do today, kind of 2 things, and I'm going to steer this conversation a little bit towards cycle commuting, but some of the things in terms of safety in particular are relevant to cyclists, whether you're riding your bike for pleasure or commuting back and forth to work. So first of all, I want to just talk about some of the benefits of cycling and cycle commuting, how they can be good for the environment, good for your health, and also good for your wallet. Those will focus more on issues related to cycle commuting specifically. But then there's a few things regarding cycling safety that I want to talk about, and those I think are relevant to anybody who's riding a bike either in the city or around the outside of the city. So first, let's talk about the environmental benefits of cycle commuting. And this is assuming that you're able to basically reduce the amount of use of your automobile in terms of driving back and forth to your workplace, whether it be to Queens or some other place of work. You can see some of the numbers down below here, which looks at CO2 emissions for various modes of transportation. And you can see that the amount of carbon dioxide released per kilometer per person is about an order of magnitude plus higher for a car than it is for a bicycle. There's also kind of embedded CO2 emissions in the production of these 2 different modes of transportation. And once again, you can see that these are significantly higher for a car than they are for a bicycle. I will say that the type of diet that you eat makes a big difference in terms of this CO2 release per kilometer per person. If you start to look at things like land use and you want to get into a very comprehensive analysis, but either way, you'll end up coming to the same conclusion that your carbon footprint can be reduced by essentially not using your car as much to drive yourself to work, and maybe using your bicycle or even walking or using some other form of active transportation. Uh, Switching away from a car to a bicycle can also help to reduce traffic congestion, and it reduces the production of various air pollutants, things like ozone, NOx gases, and particulates, all of which are produced as a result of the combustion of fossil fuels. So quite a few environmental benefits associated with switching away from a car to a bicycle for commuting purposes. Switching to a bicycle from a car can also be really good for your wallet. And the numbers I'm presenting here are basically my own example. Again, just to remind you, I live about 7.5 kilometers away from the Queens campus. First thing you avoid is you don't have to pay for parking. This number of $100 per month is even a little bit conservative. You can pay more for that for parking your car at Queens. But I've used that as a rough number for myself. You also can save money on gas and insurance. If you're able to actually give up one of your cars, you can save a lot of money on insurance. But just by switching from your car to a bicycle can save you money on gas. And in my example, I calculate that it saves me about $520 per year for my 15-kilometer round trip commute. You also get exercise. I get about 30 to 50 minutes, depending on the wind speed and the wind direction, of exercise every day when I ride back and forth to the Queens campus. And so there's no need to pay for a gym membership because I can get that aerobic exercise that is important for your health just during the time that I would spend going back and forth to work. So it also saves you some time because you don't have to budget extra time to go to the gym. You can get that physical exercise just by getting yourself to and from work. And when I add all those things up, I estimate that it saves me about $185 per month, again, with a 15-kilometer round trip commute. And finally, there's the aspect of your health. I think we all know there's a lot of research showing the benefits of exercise in terms of your overall health. I don't think I need to go through and discuss each one of these individual bullet points, but the key thing is that some form of exercise is really good for your health. And if you can combine that with transporting yourself back and forth to your workplace, as I said before, it's even more efficient in terms of your time. Okay, so maybe by now I've convinced you that there are some benefits to riding your bicycle to work. So, and if I have, so what comes next? What can you do to actually increase your safety on the road if you decide to start using your bicycle more for transportation? And that's kind of what I want to talk about next. There's a few things that you should do before you even get on your bicycle and start to ride on the roads. And one of the key ones is to purchase and wear a helmet. By law, all cyclists under 18 years old are required to wear a helmet. But as far as I'm concerned, everyone should be wearing their helmet when they're cycling on the road. I can personally speak from experience that I had a bad crash once from hitting some debris on the road. I fell and hit my head. It cracked my helmet, but I was fine. That helmet is still used as an example by people who work on brain injury as an example of why you should wear a helmet. So helmets are a good idea. It's also really important that they fit properly, though. And there's some examples down here at the bottom showing kind of inappropriate fitting helmets. This one on the left is tipped up a little bit too high. The one on the center here is pointed down too low. This one on the right is just about perfect. We use what we call the 1-2-4 salute as a way of kind of getting your helmet to fit. The 1 stands for one finger, which is what would go underneath your strap. 2 stands for the distance above your eye between the top of your eyebrow and the bottom of your helmet. And the 4 is for the 4 fingers that would go around your ear. You basically want your straps to fit, like is shown here, so that they go around the front and the back of your ear. And that helps to properly position your helmet on your head and keep it secure. If you do have a crash and you hit your helmet on the pavement, you should replace it. They're really designed as a one-use kind of a safety device. The foam that protects your head can be damaged as part of a crash, even if you don't see that. So if you ever do have the misfortune of being in an accident, you should probably just replace your helmet. Otherwise, it's good to replace them periodically. The foam can break down as a result of UV radiation and also just sweat and things like that. So they don't last forever. It's a good idea to replace them from time to time. A few other things to do before you set out to ride your bike on the road. And we kind of summarize these in what we call the ABC quick check. A stands for air in your tires. You should always check to make sure that your tires are inflated properly. This is both to increase your safety, but it'll also decrease the rate at which your tires will wear out if they're properly inflated. B stands for checking your brakes and your handlebars. You want to make sure that your brakes are functioning, both front and rear brakes, and able to stop you if required when you're riding in traffic. You want to make sure that your handlebars are tight, and a good way to check that is to basically stand over the front wheel with a leg on each side of the wheel, grab your handlebars in front of you and just kind of twist them a little bit. It's hard to see with my background up there, just to make sure that they're tight and they're not going to start moving around while you're riding. Third item is C, which is to check your chain and your crankset. You want to make sure that your crankset is tight, and you can check that by grabbing the pedals on both sides and just trying to sort of wiggle it back and forth and see if there's any movement of your crank. It's also good just to make sure that your chain is secure. It's on the gears, both on the front and also on the back, before you start riding. The other part to this is it's the quick part, which is to check your quick release devices. Now, some of you wouldn't have these on your bike, and some of you would. You'll often find them here to hold your wheels on, and also up here to hold your seat post in place. These quick releases are designed to make it easy to remove your wheel or your saddle from your bicycle. But if they're not tight, they can actually be pretty hazardous. So it's really important to make sure that those quick releases are very secure before you ride your bicycle. And finally, it's good just to do an overall check. I often check my tires, make sure there's no large cuts or anything in them before I head out on a ride, because you never know what might have happened from the previous ride. The other thing to just think about is bike theft. Bike theft is a real problem in Kingston. And if you look at some of the data at Queens over the last 10 years, roughly about 40 reported bike thefts per year during that time period, and this includes thefts of parts as well. A survey was done in 2018 by Frontenac Cycle, where they surveyed cyclists just to kind of try and assess the impact of bike theft on cyclists. They had about 250 respondents to that survey, and their data suggested that about 85% of those that actually answered the survey had experienced some type of bicycle theft, and that added up to over $150,000 in losses to cyclists. So what can you do to try and overcome this problem? Well, one thing is locking your bike properly. There's a little schematic down here which illustrates the proper way to lock your bike. Having a quality U-lock, which is shown in red down here, which you lock your frame and your rear wheel around an object that can't be moved. And then the other part to this is to use a cable which goes through your front wheel and is actually locked onto your U-lock. So this locks both your wheels, the frame, and also your front wheel to this immovable object. So that's the best way to lock your bicycle if you have to leave it out somewhere. There's also secure parking at Queens for bicycles, and there's more coming in the future. And that's another good way to protect yourself from bicycle theft, is to use the secure parking that's available. There's a few other places in Kingston that have it, and I think there'll be more of this coming in the future. The final thing you can do is to register your bicycle. we recommend using 529 Garage. This is actually an international bike registration system that's online. It's a good place to record your serial number, which is the key information that you need if your bike is stolen to try and reclaim it. We are pretty sure that the Kingston police, who have been running their own registration system for several years, are actually going to switch over soon to 529 Garage. We've been discussing that with them, and several other municipalities around Canada have adopted 529 Garage as their main registration system. We will be selling this summer. There are little stickers that you can buy as part of once you register your bike with 529 Garage, which are unique to your bicycle, have a number on them. If you're interested in those stickers, you can reach out to us. We'll be making those available to the public very soon. We just got them in the mail a few days ago. Okay, so we've kind of done the preliminary things. We've talked a little bit about before you get on the road. Now let's just finish off by talking a little bit about what you can do to be safer when you're actually riding on the roads. We often summarize the key principles in these 3 bullet points. One is to make sure you can see. Don't be distracted. Make sure that you have good visibility when you're cycling on the road. The next one is to be seen. And I often like to think about when I'm riding is to assume that I'm invisible and that a car doesn't even know that I'm there. And so when you see cars coming, you kind of assume that they just don't see you, and they might turn in front of you because they don't know you're there. There's lots of things that you can do, though, to make yourself more visible as a cyclist, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those in just a minute. And the final one is to be predictable. You may have had the experience when you've been out either as a cyclist or as a driver of a car of seeing cyclists, sort of weaving around on the roadways or shooting out of driveways or places where you don't expect them. The way to keep yourself the safest when you're on the road is to ride in a very predictable way so that cars know what you're going to be doing. So those are the key ones: see, be seen, and be predictable. We did a nice cycling safety video with a bit of a Kingston focus on it several years ago. If you'd like to watch that video, these points and also other points I'll be talking about are summarized. You can find this on YouTube. If you Google Kingston cycling safety video, or if you search for that in YouTube, you'll find this safety video. It's about 9 minutes long. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the being more visible when you're on the road. This is both being seen, but also being heard. What can you do to increase your visibility? Well, one is to use lights. We recommend using lights on both the front and the back. Lights are required if you're riding in low light conditions. Many cyclists now are actually using them during the day as well as kind of a running lights approach. Since cars have running lights during the day, many people think that cyclists should have them as well. There actually are fines, so if you're caught riding your bike during the dark periods, and the periods to which you have to have lights are 30 minutes before sunset and 30 minutes after sunrise. So if you're riding a bike in between those 2 times and you don't have lights, you can actually be fined by the police. There's a whole range of lights that are out there now with a range of different costs. It's important to get usually a red light for the back and a white light for the front. Bells are actually also required by law in Ontario, and they're actually a really good idea to use if you're riding on any of the multi-use paths around Kingston, such as the K&P Trail, just to let pedestrians or other users know that you're coming. So bells are a really good idea, again, to make it easier for people to know that you're there, to be aware of your presence. The other thing that you can do to stay safe when you're on the road in terms of being seen is to use the appropriate clothing. And even during the day, it's important to wear bright colored clothing. You can see these 2 pictures at the bottom over on the right side here and also on the left, just how much easier it is to see the cyclists wearing bright colored clothes as opposed to those that are wearing darker colored clothes. So anytime you're riding out on the roads, you can certainly use your clothing to help to increase your visibility. If you're riding at night, it's important to also wear reflective clothing in addition to having lights. There are various jackets and vests like the one shown here that have reflective material built into them. You can also purchase straps like this, which you can put around your ankle or around your arm to create more reflective surfaces to make you more visible to cars. Okay, so we've talked about the be seen part, and I want to just talk about this being predictable part and kind of the role of cyclists in terms of what their rights are in terms of use of the roadway. By law, bicycles are classified as vehicles under Ontario traffic laws, and that brings with it certain privileges, but also certain responsibilities. And one of those responsibilities is that you follow the same rules as automobiles. And this comes back to this part about being predictable. If you're out and you're behaving like an automobile, automobiles know what to expect from other automobiles. And if cyclists are behaving the same way, then they kind of know what to expect. There's a concept that captures this called vehicular cycling, and it's a concept that we find is very important, and we use when we do a lot of our educational programs. I have a definition here that I just took from Wikipedia, which is essentially riding bicycles on roads in a manner in accordance with the principles for driving in traffic. So again, it makes you be like a vehicle on the road. And again, having certain rights and also certain privileges, but you have to also behave like an automobile if you're going to be using this concept of vehicular cycling. Yeah, you're basically safer when you're riding on the road. There's a lot of research that supports this when you act like a car, because cars know what to expect. And if you're out there and you're doing things and you're indicating and you're being predictable, you'll actually be safer as a cyclist. This concept of vehicular cycling was originally developed by John Forrester, shown over here, who wrote a really neat book called Effective Cycling. If you get a chance to read it, it goes into a lot of details about some of the different aspects of this concept of vehicular cycling. So I recommend that book to you. So what are some of the things that you need to do then as a vehicle on the roadways? Well, the first one, again, it comes back to this part about being predictable. One thing you should do is use hand signals to indicate what you're going to be doing. Are you turning to the left? Are you stopping at a stop sign or a stoplight? Are you turning right? And there are actually two alternatives for a right-hand turn, whichever one you're more comfortable with, you can use. It's also important that cyclists obey all traffic signs. Cyclists should stop at stop signs, at stoplights. Again, basically observing all the same laws that apply to automobiles. What else can you do to help improve your safety on the road? We always recommend, and again, this is part of the predictable. Being predictable is riding in a straight line as much as you can. My next slide will illustrate the sort of contrast to that, but it's also important to give yourself a little space from the far edge of the road. There's often debris that accumulates. There can be drainage grading, things like that that can be hazardous for cyclists. Generally, you want to ride about a meter from the right-hand side of the road. That might be defined by a curb or various different types of features. But give yourself some space so you're not riding all the way over on the side of the road, because your chances of encountering this kind of debris and things like that is greater on the closer to the edge of the road you ride. This is just to illustrate this idea of riding in a straight line. The top one, again, it makes you more predictable if you're riding in a straight line because the car knows what you're going to be doing if they come up behind you. In contrast to that is the picture below here where a cyclist is weaving in and out of parked cars. Just imagine you're riding along as a motorist and all of a sudden the cyclist comes pulling out from this area. It can be pretty unnerving to an automobile, and if they weren't prepared for it, it might actually lead to an accident. So again, be predictable, don't swerve in and out of parked cars, ride in a straight line as much as you possibly can. a minute here. Temporary difficulty, just a second. There we go. Okay. The other thing that you can do when you're riding on the road to make you safer is to avoid the door zone. So what is the door zone? It's this area that if a car opens its door, you want to make sure that you're not riding close enough to that you would run into that door or have to perhaps swerve quickly to get around it. So we recommend riding about 1 meter away from any parked car, so you're not in that door zone. So again, you can ride in a straight line and avoid having to swerve around to avoid unexpected obstacles like an open car door. Running into an open car door is not much fun. There's a few other tricks that you can use to try and sort of assess whether or not this might happen. As you're coming close to a parked car, you can look in the mirrors of the car, and sometimes you can see whether or not there's a person in the car or not. You can also kind of look ahead and think, well, did that person just park in that space that they're in? Because if they did, there's likely a person who's about to get out of that car. You can also look for lights on the back of the car, tail lights, backup lights, things like that that might serve as a cue that someone's in that car and they might be getting out and opening their door. But the best way is just to avoid the door zone and ride about 1 meter away from parked cars. Intersections are one of the major locations in terms of sources of accidents between cyclists and automobiles. And there are lots of different ways that these can happen. And this is just to illustrate a few of the possible ways that you can have accidents that can occur. If you're driving through residential areas where there's lots of driveways, you always need to be aware of cars pulling out of the driveways. If you want to think of this as an intersection, cars could be turning left from the opposite side of the road and might turn in front of you. And that's where the thinking of yourself as being invisible. And if you see a car getting ready to do a left turn, anticipating, well, they might pull in front of me. And so I should be watching for that just in case it happens. The other kind of classic incident that can occur is what's called the right hook. And this is where a car will come up behind you and perhaps try to speed past you and then make a sudden right-hand turn right in front of you. Sometimes cars don't realize how fast you're going and they don't give you enough time before they start that right-hand turn. They assume they've gone far enough past you when in fact they haven't. So this is another, if you see a car pull up beside you and you're coming up to an intersection, anticipate the fact that they might actually turn right in front of you and be prepared for that. I've had this happen to me a few times. Usually you can avoid it just by either turning right with the car as it turns right, or stopping and letting them turn right, or something else to avoid colliding with them. But this is another very common type of accident that can occur. So again, intersections are the most hazardous place and where you need to be the most aware of the interactions between cyclists and motorists. There's various types of cycling infrastructure that you might encounter riding on the streets around Kingston. I just wanted to talk really briefly about a few of those. One are bike boxes. And here's a schematic diagram of a bike box shown here on the left-hand side. And here's actually a picture of one on a street. These are designed to help cyclists turn left at traffic lights. They really only apply when the light is red. And the idea is that if you're riding your bike up in the cycling lane, you get to a red light, you stop, and then you can move over to the left here to get yourself into a position to make a left-hand turn when when the light turns color. But if the light's not red, the bike boxes are not really in play, and to make a left-hand turn, you would just have to use sort of vehicular cycling tools and techniques to position yourself over into this left lane safely. And you can do that with a combination of hand signals, looking back over your left shoulder to make sure there are no cars coming, and then position yourself safely in this lane to make your left-hand turn. But so remember, these bike boxes really only apply when the light is red. The other piece of cycling infrastructure that's fairly new to the city are cross rides. There's a few of these now that have been implemented in the city. And again, these are often found at very busy intersections on larger roadways, designed to help cyclists navigate through these intersections, but also helping them to cross multiple lanes of roadway. I'm not going to spend the time now to talk about exactly what you do as part of using these cross rides, but I would strongly recommend if you're out and you run into these, have a look on the city's website. They have a nice video that shows how you use these cross rides. There are different signals here for automobiles as well as for cyclists, so it's important to know what to watch out for. And it's a good thing, because when you come up to these, if you haven't encountered them before, you might be a little bit confused about how best to navigate through them. So I really recommend looking at this video on the city's website for some insights into how you can use these cross rides. There's a series of key road markings that you're likely to encounter as a cyclist. These are intended to help to guide cyclists in different parts of the road. One are bicycle lanes, and this is kind of the classic marker that's used to designate a bicycle lane. This is a place that's designated for bicycle use. There are also buffered bicycle lanes, where essentially a buffer is painted on the road between the cycling lane and automobiles, again, to provide a little bit of additional security for the cyclist. In some cases, and you'll see these around the city, there are actually bollards that have been put in here to create sort of separated bike paths. There's a few places now in the city where they've used these bollards to try and create segregated bicycle lanes. Sharrows you'll see in a few places around the city. A sharrow is basically a designation for a shared lane, so it's a lane that's available to cyclists and to motorists as well. One of the common places where you see sharrows in Kingston is at the crossing of the LaSalle Causeway. It's important when you're in places like that that you actually assert yourself as a cyclist in the lane of traffic, because when you cross, for example, the LaSalle Causeway, if you kind of try and really stay over to the right-hand side so that cars can get by you, it gives cars the opportunity to try and sneak by you, and there really isn't enough room on the bridge there for two lanes of cars and a cyclist as well. But if you take that lane and use these sharrows to basically put yourself out in that lane of traffic, basically no car is going to pass you while you're kind of in that lane of traffic. And so it's a good way to try and manage the flow of cars through places like that, which if you don't, can be more hazardous. And finally, there are shared pathways. There's several of these that are probably going to be implemented as part of the Active Transportation Implementation Plan. These are shared paths between pedestrians and also cyclists. There's a few examples of these in the city, and there'll probably be more coming in the future. Remember, in cycling lanes, by law, automobiles are not supposed to park in cycling lanes, but you should be aware that you'll often encounter cars parked or sometimes just stopping for temporary purposes in cycling lanes. So just be aware that that can happen. Also, if you find glass or debris in cycling lanes, it's really good to alert the city. You can do that by email or phone. Here's the email address. They're usually very responsive about going out and cleaning up materials that can otherwise accumulate in those cycling lanes. Okay, so that kind of brings me to the end. I just have a few final thoughts I want to share with you before we open this up for some questions. Hopefully I've made a case that cycle commuting, switching away from using a car and using your bicycle, can be good for your health, it can be good for your wealth, and it can also help to protect the environment. And you can do all those things during the time when you ride back and forth to work, right? So you don't really even have to take extra time to do these things. Riding a bicycle in traffic, there's some key skills that you need. And I've talked about some of those skills today. You can learn some of these skills. And one of the things that Cycle Kingston does, and we feel very strongly about, is that if we give cyclists these skills, it'll make them safer in terms of riding in traffic. Whether or not there's infrastructure present or not, there are some key skills that'll help you as a cyclist, regardless of the kind of traffic that you're riding in. And you can learn those skills. It's never too late to learn new skills. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that there are opportunities. So as we all start to think about heading back to work, whether it's at Queens or another place, you can mix and match your forms of commuting. And Queens is going to be, I think, introducing some measures that are providing more flexibility for employees. And I know Kingston Transit also, you can take your bike with you if you're using Kingston Transit. They have bike racks on all the buses now, so you can actually put your bike on the bus and then you can ride the bus, get to your destination, take your bike off, ride it to wherever you want to go. Queens is going to be introducing a more flexible option for parking your car so that you can use, there'll be some of the lots that will be available using what's called the Honk application. It's an app. It'll be $10 a day parking in a few of the parking lots. So maybe you need to drive to campus one day a week or something like that, and then you can use your bike or the bus on those other 4 days of the week. So again, the goal is to provide more flexibility going forward, and we can talk more about this during the question and answer if that's helpful. Cycle Kingston is an organization. We're happy to help. If you think you want to switch to either cycling for recreation or you want to become a cycle commuter, we're happy to help to plan your commute, to teach you some of those safety skills that we think are important. We can help you with selecting gear, selecting your routes to work. If any of that's of interest to you, feel free to reach out to us. I put our email address here at the bottom. That's all I have to say today. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy now to open this up for questions at this point in time. Thanks.